This
if we get a lot
conference
of
will now be
requests,
recorded.
what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do some editing and put those right up on our YouTube channel where a lot of our content goes. So if you thought this was great, you can share it with others, or if you missed part of it, you can find it on our YouTube channel. And that's also where you'll find those helpful tips and tricks that I was talking about earlier. Our website is where you'll find the next events that we're doing, and we do monthly events. They're all free. In our last survey, we did a quick survey about whether people are ready to come in for either a hybrid or an in-person like we used to do up here. We've got a huge conference room. It's spacious, seats about 20, so we'll probably have about 10 folks comfortably spaced out. But I think we'll be going back to those when our next event is coming up. So I was mentioning TSTS.com, like TwinStateTechnicalServices.com, is where you'll find our monthly events. And if you haven't been getting our newsletter, you should be getting those after this event. And that's also where we tell folks what we have coming down the pike. So we're right at 1:30. So I just want to say welcome everyone that's logged in right on time. This is Micah Mosier. I'm the Client and Business Development Manager here at Twin State Technical Services. And we've got a great presenter for you today. And we're going to go into something that I think everybody is thinking about, which is security. When we're on our technology, we're using it so much more in so many different places. How can we leverage new knowledge that Michael Weir, our expert presenter, is going to share in our day-to-day lives, anywhere from working from home, working from the office, and then what are some techniques and strategies that we're using as the latest and greatest security protocols out in the world today. So the bad guys are getting better every day. So we, the good guys, have to stay one step ahead of them. And we do that with zero trust as a theory. And Michael's going to talk about the theory as well as the tactics to implement zero trust. So I want to introduce Michael Weir. Michael Weir and I have worked together for years now. He is the best trained and the most knowledgeable, I feel, about cybersecurity, particularly in the tools that we use and recommend here at Twin State, which is a Fortinet brand and device. So Michael is going to present to us, and he comes with not just years of experience, but also the highest level of certification as a network architect. And he's a technical account manager and really a solutions architect. That's where we work together. Listen to the business need and then make a recommendation and choose from there. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Michael Weir and get right into the presentation.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Micah, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. As Micah said, I'm a technical account manager for Fortinet. I'm NSE 7 certified there. I am also a CMMC registered practitioner. So for your government, DoD, and that sort of thing. I've been doing technical trainings of some kind for over a decade now. If you say, Mike, have you ever trained on fill in the blank? The answer will probably be yes. If you go back a little more than 10 years, I was actually a smart notebook trainer. So I've covered the gamut of technology, but in recent years, I focused almost entirely on security. I did the Cisco thing, just like almost everybody who works in networking. I've since then been with WatchGuard and Juniper, and now here with Fortinet. And I am here at Fortinet because I actually believe in their product, and I think they've got just about the best thing out there right now. And I'll go through that a little bit in the end. But for the majority of this, we're just going to talk about concepts. And that concept we're talking about is zero trust network access. Now, this is a little bit of a misnomer, excuse me, because if it was truly zero trust, nobody could do anything. It's least possible trust network access is what it is. So the idea that when something gets on the network, we're going to give it the ability to do only the bare minimum it needs to do to accomplish that person's function. So in other words, if you've got a file share for your company, you're not going to let people that work in accounting access HR files, which makes sense, right? But you're not going to just do it with a password. You're going to do it with complete network segmentation and breaking things into tiniest possible groups. If we're talking about a CMMC universe, we'd be talking about taking your controlled unclassified information and making it, compartmentalizing a tiny little bit, maybe like one room that only 2 people can access, and a network with only 1 or 2 people on it, subnetwork, not subnet, like the IP addressing thing. But anyway, rolling on from that, why are we talking about it right now? We're doing so because 2020 was sort of the year of the breach. Now, these are all from the various Verizon breach reports, and people can sometimes debate if their numbers are accurate or not. And if you go on the internet and look things up, you're going to see wildly varying numbers of breaches there's been per year. And the reason is they're not all reported. Some people, there's actually a number of publications out there who have said that there was less records leaked and less ransomware and less this, that, and the other thing in 2020. But the asterisk that they never mention is that this is only people who've reported how many have been leaked. It's more frequent that people report that they've been breached and not mention how much they lost, and just mention how much they've actually lost, unless A, they're really big and people are going to find out anyway, or B, they're required to do so for regulatory compliance. But either way, if you were to rewind us all the way back to about 2015, you would find that the number of breaches per year reported is relatively stable. It's between about 1750 and 2500 per year. And then we go from 2019 to 2020, and suddenly, I did the math, 96.2% increase in breaches, almost doubled. And people say, oh, well, that's because we work from home. And I say, well, that's like saying that because I broke my leg playing soccer instead of volleyball, I didn't break my leg. It doesn't matter if the breach happened because you're working from home. A breach is a breach. For lack of a better way of putting it, somebody betraying your trust is somebody betraying the trust of your network. It doesn't matter how you sliced or how it happened. So part of the reason this is happening is because our networks have more and more edges. Think of edges as doorways or windows or something like that to get into your house. And in the very, very old days, this was the edges that we looked at. We just talked about our switching edge and our Wi-Fi edge, or even back in the day, just our switching edge. I remember when I was in college, I don't think anybody even thought of Wi-Fi yet. But this is what we normally think about. We think about, okay, we've got the internet, and it comes into our switching, and it comes into our Wi-Fi. And then this time in 2020, we had to start expanding our thinking a little bit. We had to say, okay, we're going to think about people working from home, and we're going to think about our travelers. When we say travelers, isn't that just work from home? Well, travelers have their own separate risks, simply because they're frequently using public Wi-Fi from various locations, whereas at home you're usually using your private Wi-Fi or wiring in at your home. But either way, travel is also part of the new work from anywhere that's going to become our new normal. So that's the edges that we've added in what we're talking about right now. And then, of course, the other edges that are on there, the OT edge, the cellular edge, especially networking 5G and cellular, is actually becoming a much more viable technology for enterprise internet access. And then the various cloud edges, these are all definitely still there. We're going to leave those a little bit more to the side, and we will talk about cloud a little bit. But when you look at it historically, this is where we sort of were. And from 2000, we can probably say before 2000, there was two major pieces that everybody thought about, and that was antivirus on the endpoints and having a firewall. Endpoint antivirus, if you look across enterprise in general, you're going to find it has between a 95 and 98% penetration rate in markets, in end users, in customers, et cetera, across the United States. Bizarrely enough, firewalls are still only at about 60%. A lot of people have routers, have ACLs, and say, oh yeah, that's good enough for stateful packet inspection, and that's fine. It's the Netgear Nighthawk my wife wishes I would use at home. That has stateful packet inspection too. We're not really doing, and ACLs, so we're not really doing ourselves a lot of favors there. But either way, we look at this going into 2020, and this is when we're starting to make things a little more complex. So you've got, you might say, well, wait a second, aren't those actually the same things that we have in our previous endpoint security? Or, sort of yes, sort of no. So what this is saying is we have dedicated data center security. There is a differentiation between the needs of multiple environments, multiple different scenarios. We have content filtering too, which isn't just stateful packet inspection or access control. It's the idea that we're dynamically looking at what's going on in order to make our decisions. And then instead of just antivirus, we've got a more full-fledged endpoint protection system. So we have things like looking at vulnerabilities, vulnerability mitigation and remediation, software inventories, even if we add things like just sandboxing on top, the ability to be a little more dynamic with what's going on, and of course VPN. I remember there was a time when someone said to me early in my Cisco courses that someday VPNs can replace MPLS and the entire internet's just going to be made up of VPNs, and I think that may have been a little bit of wishful thinking on his part. But either way, the VPN at this point has been added into the mix as a way to make a more secure connection between two locations without having to do $1,000 a month lease line to everybody's house or something like that. And then what we're looking at in 2020 plus, and what we're going to talk about a lot today, is the cloud security, which I mentioned a little bit, but then the concepts of edge security, EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, and zero trust network access. These form a little web to protect traditional and non-traditional. So EDR, just a quick one on that, endpoint detection and response. This is ransomware's worst enemy. It's all malware's worst enemy. It is the idea that we're responding not just reactively or not just scanning things to come in, we're actually watching processes and trying to correlate different processes between different machines with the idea that we can stop things pre-execution, on execution, instead of just doing an old signature-based antivirus, or B, just behavioral-based endpoint protection or something like that, or heuristics. Edge, that nice little symbol there is Fortinet symbol for Sassy. What it really means is every edge that's coming in. And then we tie this all together to the other major, one other thing we got to talk about anytime we talk about zero trust networking access is identity. Everything needs to be identified somehow. So let's talk about this a little bit. We're going to go participatory now, so feel free to come off mute and say things, because in order to demonstrate the concept of zero trust networking access, what I would like you to do is rob my hypothetical house. Now, I will just come out and say this is not my house. This is the house that I use for these presentations because it has a certain appearance to it, and maybe it's wishful thinking, I don't know. But I would like someone, if they could, to come off mute and tell me one way they could rob my house. And
Smash a window.
All right, smash a window. Absolutely. So in my mind, I'm going to equate this back to networking, of course. Smashing a window would be like getting wireless access. I promise they're not all this creepy. Smashing a window would be getting access to your wireless edge. And the wireless edge is absolutely brutal to protect because it's super vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. If you're familiar with Pineapple, Wi-Fi Pineapple, go on Amazon, look them up, they're like 80 bucks. If you get one of those and you wander past almost any place that has Wi-Fi, you're going to be able to be a man in the middle. Also intrusions, there's people might remember the WPA hack back in the day where you could flick a couple of digits to all zeros and then it would request new authentication code. Some people might say it's a man in the middle. Really, it's an intrusion. It's exploit of an application vulnerability and persistent threats. Persistent threats are going to appear in tons of different categories here. The definition of a persistent threat can go a couple of different ways. Just think of it as like an advanced or sustained attack that when you block it, it intends to come again. So yeah, breaking a window would be a very bad thing, whether it's in my house or my network. So we might have successful robbing there. What's another way we could rob my house?
Come through the front door and break it.
Yeah, break in the front door. This is a very traditional way to break into things. It's basically your front door is more or less your WAN edge. It's your gateway to the world. And being your major touch point, it's where low to medium level things are going to be stopped. It's your intrusions, IPS services. It's malicious devices getting into your network, compromised devices getting into your network, unauthorized people getting into your network. And again, that little persistent threat thing. That's my wonderful guy whose bolt cutter's there just waiting to look through, break through the lock on your door to get in and take everything you can outside of your house. And of course, once you open the door to somebody's house, it's very easy to get things out very quickly. It's not trying to shove a 65-inch TV out through a window or something like that. It's pretty much freely going inside and out. The same way you would think of a WAN edge compromise. It's pretty much freely going in and out without any sort of restriction. All right, what's another way to rob my house? All right, I'll give you one that I thought of, and this is part of why I chose an expensive house, is because let's say I had the money to have somebody, manicure my yard for me and do some of my cleaning for me and all that kind of thing. You could say maybe you're the help, that you're coming in and you're helping in quotation marks, because in actuality, you're helping yourself. I think it's as SaaS. It's something being delivered to you to help your network. The SaaS, as much as people like to think of it as being automatically secure, or that the SaaS provider is somehow providing security for you, they're providing security for your data while it's in there, but they're not really doing anything else for you. So things like data theft, you're super liable to that, because as soon as that data, or super open to that, because as soon as that data goes in motion, it's now your responsibility to protect it. intrusions. If you look at how many times there's been iCloud leaks, it is just ridiculous. And that's also tied to unauthorized access. And then compromised content. If you're putting something into a SaaS environment, the provider's job is to make sure that it stays there safely and stays the same as when it came in. However, if when it came in, it was already compromised, then when you pull it back out, it's still compromised. This is a little bit of an extreme example because it wasn't necessarily SaaS all the way, but it'll give you an idea of what the idea of compromised content means. There's a local business here who had been ransomwared, and they didn't release all the details of what happened, as most of these companies are wont to do, but they had some stuff backed up into the cloud and some stuff backed up locally. And one of the two, I don't think we still know which one, actually contained the ransomware. That the ransomware was ransomware that waited 30 days before activating. So when they were ransomwared, they, wiped everything, restored their backups, did what they're supposed to do, and 30 days later they were ransomwared again because the content had been kept exactly as it was. The people storing content had lived up to their side of the agreement. We delivered it exactly as you delivered it to us. However, it was compromised when they delivered it, so the compromise was re-delivered back to them. All right. I might be less apt to bail you out this time, but what's another way you could rob my house? I'm not going to think you're a criminal if you can think of something creative.
I guess you hire a house cleaner and they went inside your house and took your stuff without you knowing.
So you could be, quotation marks, working in my house. Absolutely. So for working in my house, I think of that as your IaaS and your PaaS edge. And these things are as vulnerable as what you're running in them is vulnerable, if that makes sense. So if you're running a web application in one of them, you've just introduced yourself to all the vulnerabilities that come along with web application, something along those lines. But when it comes down to it, no matter what you have up in there, there's really 4 different things you're always going to be facing. Number one is intrusions. There are people, well, actually, it's relatively easy for anybody to obtain a list of the IP addresses owned by, Azure or AWS or Google Cloud or something like that. And, you can, in a day with a Kali Linux machine, blast out, just do a Hail Mary attack or something onto all those IP addresses and just see what sticks, right? Take paths of least resistance. So even though this is a service being provided to you, and the service itself might be secure, it's just like something you would have on your premises. It's got to be protected by a firewall or something, otherwise your front door is open. Same thing with compromised devices. If you have a compromised device, just like if you're connecting to SaaS, if you have a compromised device connecting to your IaaS or PaaS application, then it's the same deal of the IaaS or PaaS people are responsible for the security of people not breaking in. And of course, like I said, of intrusions, if you've already opened your door crack and you get in and someone gets in through that crack, then it's not the provider's responsibility either. But if they put a compromised device gets on that network, then the provider says, oh, it got on the network, it was authorized, it did what it was supposed to do and got down what it was supposed to do, and that's just it. Also, unauthorized access. So this is the insider threat. And I could probably put this in a lot of different categories. And insider threat, people think, oh, I mean, I have a bad employee who's trying to steal from me. And like, if you're Capital One, yeah, that's what happened. If you're a number of these other companies that faced insider threats, though, such as SolarWinds, the insider threat, it came from inside because of a user's ignorance or a user performing a bad behavior, credentials getting leaked or something like that. So it's not that the person doing the bad actions was an insider, it's that the threat originated from inside the network. And of course, persistent threats, once again, the day and age of things working at machine speed gives us the ability to be very persistent if we want to. All right, how else can we rob my house?
Bulldozer.
That's kind of extreme. I suppose technically speaking, we could bulldoze my house, but I don't know if you're getting anything out of it either. I don't have a slide on here for that, but thinking about what that could possibly represent, there's this there's this classification of ransomware, mostly originates from Chinese groups, called wipers. And some of the China sanctioned groups will send wiper ransomware out to businesses in the United States that would be whose demise or whose delay would be beneficial to the commercial interests of China. And their ransomware, well, they appear to be ransomware, but what they're really doing is just throwing up a screen. And in the background, while that screen is up, instead of encrypting your files, it's just deleting them. It's wiping them out. Or even, or maybe like an old school USB kill stick. It's the idea that if you bulldoze my house, neither of us win. But that might have been the point. I appreciate it. I'm gonna put that in some future ones. I like that. Bulldoze my house. What else can we do? All right, I'll bail you guys out on this one a little bit in the interest of time. Let's just say I leave, or I've left and come back and left my car unlocked, or something along those lines. I've somehow been absent from the house. That's what I'm considering the remote edge. Now, remote edge, like I said, this is work from home and travel, because those are two distinct sets of vulnerabilities. We know people tend to lump them together. The major vulnerability there is the man in the middle, whether it be on Wi-Fi in a hotel, or if it be somebody like I live next to some people that have I think we got a 17-year-old and 18-year-old, and they're very intrepid and seem to be relatively knowledgeable about the internet and its workings and things like that. And I can tell when they've gotten in trouble because their dad takes away the Wi-Fi password, and suddenly I'm facing a bunch of wireless intrusions in my house because I've got the most secure house on the block. I've got something like $100,000 worth of Fortinet equipment in here. I have pretty much every single product. That's just a privilege of being me. But you'd be surprised how often man in the middle can also happen at your house. And of course, data theft, intrusions, compromised devices, unauthorized access. Basically, anytime you're doing a travel or work from home or otherwise remote edge connection, when that device connects, that device could have been compromised in the meantime, because aside from your normal endpoint protection, the only protection that's going on from a networking perspective is when you're on the corporate network. And even then, if it's a split tunnel VPN, it's only the part of the VPN that's going, or the only part of the traffic that's going to the corporate network. So you might be allowing compromised devices on just by the fact you do have to allow devices on. And of course, unauthorized access, credential theft is surprisingly easy. The top 10 most common passwords in the United States still include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They include QUER, UIOP, and also ASDF, HJKL, and then some of those with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the end. It's amazing how, if people want speed, people want to be able to go and the password's in. And there's upsides and there's downsides to that, but mostly downsides. And then I'm going to put up this. I only have one left. In the interest of time, I'm going to just put it up, and it's also my wife's favorite picture. And that is that you're over for breakfast. Let's say I say, all right, yeah, let's have a breakfast here. Come on over. My wife makes some waffles, and then I say, all right, well, I'm going to go take a shower, get ready for work, and you happen to plop yourself down at my computer. This is some stuff that's specific to work from home. I look at it this way, and the worst part of work from home, I touched on a little bit on the previous one, but the worst part of work from home is the device. Because if you send your employees home with nice laptops or nice desktops, or even just a nice, Android tablet or something like that, and it's nicer than the one they have, they're probably going to use it. This is going to be a case where you're almost guaranteed that there's a device that's going to be for personal non-work use. And if there's a flaw, people say, don't say this, Mike, it's insulting. If there's a flaw in any security system, it is people. If security administrators and security professionals and architects and that kind of thing were able to get inside people's minds, that would perfect the system. But no matter how well a system is built, you have to compensate for the fact there's going to be people clicking on that the Nigerian buyback scam or things along those lines that we know from back in the day. So I'm not going to leave you hanging and just say, man, now you're saying, oh man, what on earth am I going to do? I'm going to step up to the solution side of thing now. And I want to make one note before we get to the solutions, and that is, I'm guessing in probably about 15% of your minds, you're saying to yourselves, well, these all sound like things that we solve via VPN. There's an important distinction to be made here, that a VPN, typically speaking, is a one-time trust check with one trust check that will set access once and maintain by your connectivity by a static rule set. And the concept of ZTNA is that we are continuously maintaining these trust checks, and your access rules change based on what you're doing, whether you're out, accessing this application, you've checked off these boxes to go to this object, and then the rule sets change based on the context. And the thing about ZTNA is it continues when you're on site. So VPN, once you go on site, you're no longer on VPN. People say, all right, cool, we're protected again. But that doesn't mean you still shouldn't have a device, even if it's never left the office. You should still be maintaining those trust checks on it. It should still be, based on the application, based on context, there should be different rules on it so you can get the minimum level of trust possible and therefore the maximum level of security possible. And just to put together everything we talked about, here's a list of all the things that came up in those different categories. And of course, these mean different things in different areas. Intrusions and exploits are different for a firewall versus they are for SaaS or something like that. And some of them are, of course, common. Credential theft is credential theft. If you want to look at the nuts and bolts and the way to, if somebody walks in and says, I just need to secure my business, I've got $200 in my pocket. The thing I would say to everybody in that case is get a firewall. And since I'm the Fortinet professional and Twin States works with Fortinet, I'm going to be putting these in Forta terms. If you don't get the joke now, you will. For everything Fortinet starts with Forta and then put on the end of it the product that you're looking for. So the FortiGate is going to protect against the majority of things coming in because it's your front door, right? I could put on a whole bunch of different pieces of security for my house, but if I didn't secure my front door, it's all kind of pointless. So we all know what IPS is, and everybody puts on IPS and everybody puts on gateway antivirus and web filtering, but there's a couple other things you can do on a gateway that people should really consider. And that is that, if we're looking at a fully Fortinet environment here, FortiGates and FortiSwitches together, first of all, FortiSwitches do 802.1x, and if you're hooking up to a FortiGate, you can actually have a onboarding NAC in there. It's not going to be dynamic, but it's going to look at the either the characteristics of the device when it gets on, or if you have using enterprise management system to tag your device and put it in categories that way, it's going to look at the device when it gets on and what the tags are, and thus say, all right, this device is coming to me tagged compromised, or this device is not in my rule list, so I'm going to categorize it as guest, or I'm just going to say it's unwanted and send it to a black hole. Or it's going to be, there's unauthorized access going on here. These variables that I have in my system, these don't match. That's something that a good firewall like a FortiGate can block, so it can perform light NAC. Now, a light NAC like that you're getting off a FortiGate and a FortiSwitch just for onboarding. Obviously, it's not a complete solution to the problem, but like I said, if somebody came to me with $200 in their pocket and said, I need to secure my network, this is the direction I would send them. And don't think that means that you're suddenly going to get a FortiGate for $200. I don't ever get to talk about price, which I like because I can put together fantasy systems, and then I dump the price conversations off onto other people. Sorry, other people. And then a good firewall these days also has data leak prevention on it, and this is generalized. It's not as specific as like the one you would have on a mail product, the one you would have on a SaaS protection product or a Sassy or something like that. But it is protection nonetheless of keeping certain things, either file types or files or certain types of information from leaving your network. And persistent threats, almost everything these days comes with sandboxing. I feel like it's almost redundant to say that you need to have sandboxing on your system. But what I will say is that even the smallest corporation or even the smallest organization does have to start thinking about DDoS protection or light DDoS protection. FortiGates and some other firewalls from their manufacturers include that. It's just rate-based and criteria-based. It's not dynamic, but it will stop something that's aimed at persistently disrupting your business from continuing to persistently disrupt your business. So there is your FortiGate. I spoke a little bit about the FortiSwitch NAC in this slide, but I want to talk about network access in general, specifically a full network access controller like FortiNAC, or there's plenty of others out there. Like I said, I'm just talking Fortinet because it's what I know and what I'm trained in, that sort of thing. NACs are essential these days. And the reason I say that is because even the best constructed network with firewalls and, with application controls and tons of different policies for tons of different users and all that kind of thing, there's always going to be holes because of the massive variety of things that are on a network. If you think about, I use a one or two, either as a grocery store or a college cafeteria, or really just let's just go with a college dorm for this one. Let's say you're trying to secure a college dorm. What do you have in there? Well, you've got the college's devices connected to the internet. You've got all the students' guest devices on there, including their wireless devices and phones and that kind of thing. But what else do you have? You have door sensors, you have temperature sensors, you have what's probably networked cameras, you have what's probably networked smoke detectors, that sort of thing. These are all devices on the network. And far be it for me to mention another company, but Check Point researchers did something that was really cool, and I hope no one ever does it live, but they demonstrated at a conference they could actually use a Canon DSLR camera to A, leak out valuable data, and B, introduce ransomware to a network. So off a DSLR camera that was capable of connecting straight to Wi-Fi. If you stop and think about that, in some ways it's mind-blowing, but in some ways it's not. Think about it, a photo has EXIF data on it. EXIF data gives valuable information about devices and locations and all that kind of thing. So that can be, if you can get to that camera, that can be exfiltrated. And then if you're on something in a network, you're on something in the network, and that means you can be a pivot point for spreading ransomware. But that's part of a NAC, like a Fortinet also has a behavioral aspect too, in saying this device has gone out of the bounds of what we would normally consider in there. I'm going to tell FortiGate, hey, give this thing the boot. And then network access controller at its root is access controller. It stops unauthorized access to resources, people going out of their zone or out of their lane, that kind of thing. So that's got a lot of your wired threats covered, but let's talk about wireless. So there's these things, people think of wireless as magic. I'm sure any of you that have tried to install wireless systems or maintain wireless systems can agree with me on that one. That people think wireless is magic. You turn it on and it's there and it's awesome. That's not really true. Before, I should have said this, before I was a security trainer, I was actually our company-wide wireless trainer for our tech services department. And the physics behind wireless is incredible. But besides that, people don't realize that effectively a wireless access point is just an open network port. And you wouldn't just leave an open network port for anybody to plug into. You're gonna defend that port. And a AP is it's virtually a giant switch. So you've got to think of it that way and think, I have to secure this. Now, a wireless intrusion is of a different nature than what we would consider to be a traditional intrusion. So that's why there's wireless intrusion detection and wireless intrusion prevention. And much like IDS and IPS, they were originally distinct things, now they're kind of starting to blend together. Well, Forti APs are controlled from the FortiGate just like the Forti switches, and other manufacturers have some link to clouds and things along those lines. Almost everybody's starting to get into the secure AP market. But either way, intrusion prevention on an AP is simply taking the application vulnerabilities and denial of service requests via multiple connection requests and starvation, all those different kinds of things that you can manage to do through an AP to a network. It's taking those and specifically blocking them. And man in the middle, there's things like rogue AP detection, detecting repeaters, that sort of thing. You can also do that right on the AP now, instead of having to either A, search for them manually, or B, you have to run an entirely different system to find those types of things. And it used to be you had to have a massive controller to do that stuff too, and that's not the case anymore. You can even do that with cloud-controlled access points. So the level of accessibility to the general public of that is greatly improved. And then something we should all be thinking about, and I'm not sure why people aren't doing it, is multi-factor authentication, or at least two-factor authentication. Some people say, well, why do they do two-factor authentication? It's just 6 digits and it only changes once a minute. The reason for that is that there's a whole variety of reasons, but the reason that you'd even use something just simple like that, even though that is a relatively low number of combinations for a computer to guess at, is because you're making it incrementally harder for a person to get in. Like if they steal a username and password, and they steal a username and password from 500 different businesses, and you've got two-factor authentication, I can spend processor cycles trying to break into yours, or I can find someone who doesn't just hop in that way. It's a deterrent. Also, someone may not know that their password has been stolen, but if their fob has been stolen or their phone has been stolen, they know. And now you know to deactivate that. It's an immediate instead of waiting for reactive. But either way, the big thing about FortiToken is those two things: prevent credential theft and prevent unauthorized access. This is an aside. This isn't necessarily an opinion. This is something that is backed up by research, but just isn't implemented yet. And NIST actually considered it a couple of years ago. But that was saying that SMS-based two-factor authentication can no longer be considered secure because it's of trivial difficulty to intercept text messages, which is true. There's this great show called Mr. Robot. I highly encourage you all to watch it because it's basically taking a course on cybersecurity wrapped up in an exciting drama. But they do a nice demonstration in one of the episodes of what you could do to intercept text messages and phone calls and how easy it really is. A couple $1,000s, couple hours, rent some stuff, and there you go. So FortiToken and any other token from any other manufacturer you should be using should be time-based one-time passwords, preferably not prompt-based or anything like that. So when I have my FortiToken on my phone, right, it's just a mobile one. That may not be the greatest thing, but it's not text-based. It is running an algorithm just like my FortiGate. They're hitting the same number at the same time. So even if my phone's off the internet, I open up the app, it's still got a 6-digit number expiring and resetting at the same time as the firewall, so I can just put it in and get in that way. There's nothing being pushed back and forth. There's no event data going back and forth. It's relatively invisible. Also, when you're doing two-factor authentication, try and find a system which is going to do multiple challenge and response. So, if you put in your username, your password, and your two-factor authentication all at once, technically that's just one challenge and response. But if you don't even get the option to put in the username and the two-factor until username and password have been entered correctly, that just gives you an extra layer of security. Moving on to the endpoint specifically. Now we covered the network and the access to the network and that kind of thing. Let's talk about the endpoint specifically. This is where we get into FortiClient. Now, FortiClient, we have to draw a line between consumer level antivirus, sort of like prosumer level antivirus, and an actual enterprise antivirus. And an actual enterprise antivirus, at least in my mind, has to have a couple of different qualifications on it. Those qualifications include the fact that there's some form of central management, that there's some dynamic aspect to it, and it is assessing the device, not behaviorally, and not just looking at signatures. Almost everybody does that these days. There's some that don't, but what surprises me is some people still use those in their corporate environments. Ideally speaking, your antivirus isn't just going to have signatures, it's also going to look for intrusions and exploits. And if you're getting everything from a single manufacturer like Fortinet, or you are a fabric partner, Fortinet has something like 200 some different vendors that they partner with to provide shared security information. It can assess whether this device is compromised. And say I've got a network, it's got a FortiGate, a FortiClient, FortiAnalyzer on it, I can say, when that thing gets on, this is a compromised host, we're gonna send an email to the administrator, we're gonna ban the IP, and we're gonna tell FortiClient to lock down the client, something like that, If it's an enterprise antivirus, it needs to have functions like that based on assuming a device does get compromised. You might say, well, if it has antivirus, how can it get compromised? Once again, this is the human aspect at work here. No, that's enough said. The man-in-the-middle attacks, you can also detect those off the endpoint. And the persistent threats, once again, we have to protect the endpoint can be hit by the same attacks as a network or anything else. We have to do protection there, specifically in this case for things like ransomware, doxware, wipers, or things along those lines. And I feel like endpoint antivirus we don't have to spend much longer on, but these last couple I want to explain in a little more detail. And this is related to your SaaS and also a little bit to your passes. FortiCASB. CASB stands for Cloud Access Security Broker. And it's actually an older name because it used to literally just be the access, but now there's more to it. It's a device, or in this case, a VM, or actually this could be SaaS provided, that brokers an API connection straight to the service. So like if you're using Office 365 services, your employees would connect via FortiCASB. FortiCASB, since it's API connected, the Office 365 and FortiCASB are actually aware of each other. It's not a proxy like a lot of other things, and can do concerted actions back and forth. So this prevents unwanted devices because they're not authenticating through the CASB. They're no longer getting in because somebody could figure out, oh, I know what this organization's, the address of their 365 incidents, or something along those lines. Even if they do, even if they have the right username and password, only things coming through the CASB count. So we've got a much stronger protection against unwanted devices and unauthorized access there. Some other things to think about, though, is that since FortiCASB is watching the flow, or any other good CASB, enterprise CASB these days, is watching the flow back and forth, it can also prevent man-in-the-middle attacks and, perhaps more importantly, data leaks. Because, like I said, it's watching the content. It's the SaaS and the CASB are aware of each other. So if there is data being pulled out anomalously, or data being pulled out that matches a certain signature and a certain rate, so like if suddenly credit card addresses just start flowing out, this is something you now have control over. And one of the things I didn't put on here, but is valuable to note about FortiCASB is that since it is an API connection, it can scan data in motion and it can scan data at rest in the SaaS in your SaaS environment for threats. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, you know, Office 365 says that they do that for me, and you got to think about the purpose. What would be Microsoft's purpose in this and providing this service to you and what they're protecting versus what your purpose would be. So as I said before, Microsoft's job is to make sure that whoever gets into your Office 365 had legitimate access to it, and whatever is in there is kept the way it's supposed to be in there, the way you put it in there until it's changed. Flaws in that: number one, someone could have stolen credentials and get access, and number two, you could have put bad data up there to begin with. So that's where you start getting into additional layers of security like the CASB. And then the hot term right now, hot thing out there is Sassy, and I'm talking about FortiSASE. There's a number of Sassy providers out there. Unfortunately, the industry definition of Sassy hasn't quite settled yet. FortiSASE, and what I would consider quotation marks, you know, the best generation of Sassy. It's going to be a firewall as a service that includes, you know, has IPS on for the endpoint, data loss prevention for the endpoint, DNS services for the endpoint, secure web gateway / proxy, and some sort of sandboxing. And the idea is that if you were to do a VPN to your corporate site and do a non-split tunnel VPN, just have everybody sending 100% of their data through the corporate site, you would get some of those services. Technically speaking, it's still an internet touch point. Even if you have a VPN, it might be possible to circumvent that. But this gives you all of those services for anyone, anywhere, even when they're not on the VPN. And I think the benefits to that are relatively obvious in this day and age, especially if a travel worker, but also from the work from home. That you will be in a situation where effectively whoever is traveling with that device is always behind a firewall. Doesn't matter if they're remote, doesn't matter. You know, if they're in office, obviously they're behind your firewall. They can be from home, they can be from a hotel, an airplane, wherever they are, they're always behind a firewall. And that's really where we're looking at for the future of things, that there will be a firewall, effectively a firewall protecting everybody all across the internet. And then we're taking, you know, our 2000 to 2010 security there of having a firewall and endpoint protection and moving it out so even the endpoints have a firewall now too. And of course, being right on the endpoint, it can watch for things like data leaks that, you know, or even just compliance. Even if it's not a malicious data leak, if somebody's sending out something they shouldn't be sending out because of your PCI compliance needs or something like that, voila, FortiSASE or another SASE can watch for it. And then just for those that need to have a visual representation of everything, I have two reference diagrams I put out here. This is what I would say would be a good zero trust on-site deployment. And it consists of the cores of what I talked about, right? The black lines are where things are obviously going, and then the dotted lines are logically speaking where they're going. So you've got your endpoint protection, next generation endpoint protection in terms of FortiClient, people connecting through a FortiAP to stop your wireless intrusions, through the FortiSwitch and a FortiNAC, some combination of those to pay attention to the client and make sure A, it's the right thing when it's on boards, and B, its behavior stays correct, or else we have to move it. FortiGate as your firewall to stop all those threats coming in from the WAN, and then we've got that pathway secured, but then the additional protection of a CASB so that when you're accessing your SaaS or PaaS applications, you have a modicum of security there. For those who say, well, you mentioned IaaS, and you didn't mention anything else about IaaS afterwards, there's a thing called FortiCWP, remember what I said about the nomenclature, Florida Cloud Workload Protection. There would be a specific protection for that, but I figured that might start making these things too confusing. And then when you take that on-site and you roll it off-site, this is where the SASE starts to come in. And technically speaking, all the SASE connectivity is going to the WAN. But logically speaking, your SASE can still broker things for FortiCASB. It can do VPN to the FortiGate. It can firewall out to the WAN, make secure connections to the cloud. All these different things that you were doing on site. In this picture, with the AP, the switch, and the FortiGate, well, not so much the AP because we're not worried about wireless intrusion. The switch and the FortiGate and stuff, we're now consolidating it into something accessible on the endpoint. And this is why that's going to become a big thing, is because that is in a day and age where a mobile workforce effectively has mobile offices. Now we've created a mobile office on their client itself, protecting the whole thing, not just the corporate information. With that, I am open to questions. I tend to speak fast. People said it's either like listening to a fire hose or listening to the Micro Machines guy from those old advertisements. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. Congratulations for being old. That was not supposed to happen. But yeah, does anybody have any questions? I did that great a job.
Hey, Michael, this is Micah. So I love the topic and the theory. If someone was going to start taking steps in the right direction, knowing that that's where they want to go, what are some of those key pieces? Like you, the last slide there, you had like Forta token and some of the other things that are um, core essential components. But what are some of the things that are like the easiest, lowest barrier to getting started to go in the right direction?
Sure. I'm going to unshare and reshare my screen for a second so I can pull up the actual interface of a device. Well, we can do it a little more abstractly than that. So the basic things you should do is, number one, have a firewall. Like I said, for reasons I don't understand, only 60% of enterprises have a firewall. The basics you have to implement after that are IDAM, Identity and Access Management. If you have a Radius or you have an LDAP server or some sort of identity management on site, link that to your firewall, to your FortiGate or whatever, so that then when your clients are on, there's at least some verification of their identity. And if you already have both, it doesn't cost anything to make that link. It's just a little bit of configuration. And that would be the very earliest bits of a zero trust networking architecture, would be the fact that you're identifying the identities. You're assessing the identities of the people getting on your network and where you're going. Once you've done that, then that's a case of being able to expand to things like having a more dynamic access controller, or putting in some of these other pieces we talk about. But that's the bare minimum for zero trust networking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think to even put it simply, if those that aren't sure what that meant was, now you've really consolidated authentication to one single source of truth so that you have less places to keep maintain. And also it's more accurate. So it's easier for users to reset passwords and now have that go across all the places that we're having to try to authenticate. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I see Cliff put in the chat that can you prioritize the zero trust access components for implementation. So you're kind of going down that path right now, saying the firewall is the first one. Where do we go next?
So we've got our firewall, we've got our access control. This could be a point of debate, but if you've got those two things, I think the next logical place to go is an endpoint client or some sort of endpoint security that can leverage the advantages of those two. In Fortinet world, you can link the endpoint management service to the FortiGate so they can share information back and forth. So the enterprise management service can tag a client based on its posture, and then the FortiGate can act on that tag. But I look at it, one of the things I do to relax is build things like tables and all that, which people say, that's really weird. And I say, a table can't get a bug and malfunction on you. But it's the idea like, a table won't balance unless it has at least 3 legs. And that would be your third leg then, because you've got the leg that is the firewall, the leg that is your identity management server, and then the leg that is your client on the endpoint. And all those 3 legs are now talking to each other. And if I had to say what's step 4 after that, step 4 after that is when we start enriching with products specific to your use case. If you have anybody that's working remote with VPN, two-factor authentication is a must. Two-factor authentication leverages what you already have, though, because if we're at this point in our maturity, we've got our firewall, we've got our sorry, my wife just reminded me that asked me who was picking up my daughter from school. We got this. You've already got your firewall in place now. You've got your identity management source in place. You got your endpoint source and endpoint control in place. Two-factor authentication is very cheap and easy to implement, and it adds a ridiculously high level of security compared to not having it. You're putting yourself in the realm of easy target to medium target, I would say, with that. I have my own YouTube channel too that there's some stuff on, but one of the videos I did is how to not be a target of opportunity. Because if you don't have two-factor authentication going on and there's a leak of your credentials, then you've got a case where you're now a target of opportunity. There's this great site out there, Have I Been Owned, but owned being spelled with a P, like the old, Warcraft joke there, haveibeenpwned.com. If you go there, you can type in your email address, and it will search the dark web, just regular posting forums and hosting sites and all that, to see if your email address appears there. And you would be surprised how many of your email addresses are going to appear there. And if they appear there, that means you've already at partial credential theft. Doesn't mean they have your password necessarily, but it means somebody has verified a human has this email address, which means you're now an attack of opportunity. Is that far enough down the road? Because I can keep rolling with this progression if you want me to.
No, I think that's great. I think that ties it in together, you know, starting from the top at the firewall and moving down.
Yeah.
Any other questions that we have from anybody? One thing that I think is difficult is to really understand, we've heard about this, we've learned about it, but how do we really understand and convey our security posture to leadership so that we can, you know, we understand as network admins that this is what we should be doing, but getting that current state and here's where we are and this is where we should be, or industry, you know, news and things like that. What do you think about that? Is there any resources that you'd recommend?
So I'm going to pull a little bit on from my knowledge as an assessor on this one. So I'm going to switch hats from being an architect to being an assessor. And one of the first things that any good assessor does when they go on a site is ask who is responsible for this policy. And one of there's a couple of different ways we can do this. One of the ways to really scare the pants out of people and upper level executives say, you know, all right, who is responsible for your security policy? And they can probably answer that question. But then if you know you hit them again, well, okay, then who is responsible for enforcing email policy, et cetera, et cetera? Who is often a very hard question, much harder question to answer than what. And then the assessor side of me also says on a different way that sometimes a concrete assessment is just what you have to do. So Fortinet has this thing called the Cyber Threat Assessment Program. It is taking a FortiGate, putting it in an existing environment as a one-arm sniffer where it'll sit there for a week and just collect all the record or a log of all the failures of the current solution, whether it be, you know, intrusions and application vulnerabilities or risky application usage or, you know, endpoint callouts to known malicious sites or, you know, it even give you statistics about like if somebody was using Netflix all day and that kind of thing. And that's something concrete to say, look, hey, this is happening right now. There's also a couple of other products out there. There's FortiPen Test. There's obviously Pro Services penetration testing, and others that move from the real and the concrete, but also the easy to gather of a cyber threat assessment and bump that up to like a penetration test. Penetration tests are much more heady and much more verbose and harder to digest for someone that's in leadership in a cyber threat assessment. But if you can prove to leadership that there is a problem, that's oftentimes half the battle or more.
Yeah, the CTAP, that cyber threat assessment was like the first thing I thought of too. It's non-invasive, it's easy to do, and it gives you a wealth of information. And it's really pretty in the deliverable too, so that you can take it and make sense of it when you have to explain it.
Delivering those is one of my favorite parts of my job because I get to scare people. I've never run one that came across clean. I've been running them, you know, continuously for 2 years now. And I've never had anyone that didn't have a compromised environment, which is scary if you stop and think about it.
Well, I think that puts in perspective where we all are at in reality, right? Like we're talking about best case, this is what's coming, this is what's new, this is how we see it happening in the future, but it is a road to get there. And I think we're all in it too, right? Like I don't think anybody is this quite, no one's perfect. And this is steps towards there, but just incremental change can be accomplished.
Absolutely. And it's, I liken it this way. I've put on some weight over the course of quarantine. And if I were to sit there and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to lose all this weight by the end of next week or something, you know, I would very quickly get discouraged because it wasn't going to happen. So don't look at your environment and be like, yeah, we got to implement all this stuff today, because that's probably not going to happen. But realistically, for every little bit of weight I drop, I get a little healthier. It's like that. We can assess your environment with that CTAP or something and say like, this is what's wrong with your environment, and you don't necessarily have to. It's not like it's an all or nothing solution. We can incrementally improve until we get you where you need to be.
Well, attending events like this certainly are steps in the right direction. So we've got about 7 minutes left and want to give folks another minute to ask any other questions. Otherwise, we'll let everyone know what we can do to help in the near future with more training and events. So last call for questions from anybody, chat or through the voice.
Hey, Micah, we have another question from Cliff in the
Do your
chat.
product, yep, do your products play well with Microsoft products such as Intune and MFA, which is multi-factor authentication?
So I'll start with the MFA one first. There's a product called Factor Authenticator. I told you just throw Fortinet in front of it all. Factor Authenticator is it's an aggregator of different identity sources. And if you're using any of the Microsoft MFA products right now, you can ingest those through Factor Authenticator and get it into the rest of your network. On a broader scale than that, everything that is Fortinet works on industry standard protocols. And so it's not like certain other brands that, you know, they have names like begin with a C, where they take things, tweak them a little bit, and make them so they only work with their own stuff to try to lock you into an ecosystem. So anything from any vendor, Microsoft included, that works on industry standard protocols is going to work with Fortinet. We also have a Fabric partnership with Microsoft. So you can go to Fortinet's website and see a list, but there's a long list of products that we have some kind of pre-built integration with. And then the major parts of the Fortinet suite all run on either JSON or XML, and can take JSON commands or take XML commands in the background. So there's multiple ways to skin that bird, or however you say that.
Good question, Cliff.
Whoops, did not want that to happen. I will put up, no, I guess I'm not putting anything up, it crashed up. Okay, I was gonna put up your newsletter sign up link, but apparently that is not in the will of the GoToMeeting today.
That is quite all right. Our website, tsts.com, is where you'll find the newsletter sign up, and I'll actually put the link in the thread. But if you're getting our monthly newsletters already, you can certainly pass this on to others. There's fun stuff in there, tips and tricks, a little bit about what's happening in the community if it's relative, and there's the link there. I just put it in the chat to sign up for the newsletter. And then in conclusion, the next client event that we do have is going to be something I think is really fun, and it's kind of in the same sense of, you know, what information is out there, and it's going to show you, if you have a website for your organization, how you can identify anonymous traffic. So when I am at Twin State working and I go to a website, that website, using a tool called Leadfeeder, can identify that someone at Twin State actually went to the website, checked out these 3 or 4 pages, spent this much time on them, and then in this tool, it'll actually help you find the people in that organization through LinkedIn contact info. It can bolt into some CRM as well as Google Analytics. So if you are in sales or marketing, or are interested in even what's happening right now as you, a consumer, are browsing the internet, this is a telling presentation, and it's a lot of fun too. Perfect. And Melina just mentioned that she'll be sending out a survey with instructions to redeem the lunch gift cards for the first 20 attendees that joined the event today. So thank you, everybody. Please take time to take the survey. We do these events for you. And actually, you know, a lot of the topics that we're getting are directly from those that attend. Michael, thank you so much. This was a great presentation, man. You are sharp. You know this stuff well. And I would be happy to connect anybody on the line with an expert like Michael, so we can talk about Zero Trust, the firewall that you have now, if it's the first step for you, or even some of like the MFA things that Cliff was asking about. So with that, everybody, have a wonderful rest of the week, and I hope you enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you at our next event. Take care.
Happy Thursday, everybody.